I want to go through a few different ways of writing out a quadratic function that you might see. The first one that we're going to look at is something called general form, okay, and it's y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. Now again, you might recognize that from grade 10 going through linear function, polynomials and factoring, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But this is what we call general form. Y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. A, b, and c are going to be some sort of number that is in front of the x squared and the b, the x, and then we have our constant right here. This is going to be the graph that we have here. Okay, so this is the point -2, 0. This is the point 0, 0, and I'm going to make sure to label these. And this is the point -1, -4. Those are our 3 points. There's our vertex. We could draw in everything else as well. Okay, I'm going to go through that just really quickly here. Here's our axis of symmetry. Okay, so x equals -1. Now, this graph right here has the equation in general form, and this isn't something that I just pulled out of a hat here. I have this written down, and I'm just going to write it out straight ways from what we have there. Okay, y is equal to 4x squared plus 8x plus 0. Okay, so the a value would be 4, the b value would be 8, and the c value is 0. Now, here, when I talked about how we have open upward and downward graphs, this is where we're going to go through it here. If our a value is greater than 0, so it's positive, so you notice here how the 4 is greater than 0, it's a positive number, then the parabola is going to open upward, okay, every single time. So if our a value is greater than 0, then our parabola is going to open upward, and it's going to have this type of shape. Okay, so it's going to have that type of shape. Now I'll get into a little bit more of what a does in a little bit, but we have a second way that we can describe the graph, and we're going to go through how this is really handy as well, and it is in vertex form. And so it has this form right here. Y is equal to a x minus h squared plus k. This is also a quadratic. Okay, and I'm just going to put in this is 1, let me just double check here, 1, 1. My graph isn't labeled very well. I cut off some of it. That should be that's a 1 right there. Yeah, that makes more sense. That's a -1. Okay, so that's 1, 1. This is the point 3, 0, and this is the point -1, 0. Okay, there's a graph. This form here, vertex form, really deals with our vertex and very particularly with our vertex. Now you'll notice here that it is opening down, so we can assume that our a value is not positive, it's probably negative, and in fact when we put it in here, our a value is -1/4 x minus 1 squared plus 1. The hk is in fact our vertex. I'm going to put that in here. This is our vertex, hk. So the h value is our x point for the vertex, and our k value is our y value for the vertex, okay, which is really quite handy and nice, especially when I start doing things with that. And then our a value again is going to represent how the graph is opening, and so if a is less than 0, so it's a negative, then the parabola is going to open downward. Okay, so it's going to open downward. So positive, it opens upward; negative, it opens downward. Okay, it opens down. Now, a does a couple other things as well, or a few little interesting tidbits or things to note with a. A also represents the width of the graph. Okay, the farther that a is from 0, the narrower the graph is going to be. So here we have an a of 4, and our graph is actually quite narrow, and we'll take a look at why it's so narrow. And here we have a graph of -1/4, an a of -1/4, and the graph is actually quite wide in comparison. We'll go through how that works in just a little bit. You'll notice here the graph goes, it's from -2 to 0, so that's like 2. Here that same stretch is like 4 or even more. So we can see that it's in fact a little bit narrower. Okay. how we can kind of really take a look at that is that A is the distance above the vertex where the parabola has a width of 2, or 1 mark each from our axis of symmetry. I'm going to put the axis of symmetry in here. This is x is equal to 1. Okay, I'm just going to describe this a little bit right away. On here, we're at 4 here. So our A value is 1. If we go up 4 spots, and so I'm just going to do a pink line here. So that's up 4. Then the width right here is 2. It's 1 on this side, 1 on that side. Okay, so if we go up 4 spots, we go 1 over. So from -1 to 0, and from -1 to -2, it goes over 1. So that represents our A. So you notice how we go up 4 and over 1. So it's actually quite a ways up and then over. In this one here, we're only going to go a quarter, which is going to actually be half of this. So that's 1/4. And then across from there, it is 2 across. So that's 1 there. So from 1 to 0, and from 1 to 2 is 1. So it's a very short little period, and then it actually makes it much wider. So that's something that we can understand using our A value as well. It represents how narrow or wide, in fact, it is. Now, a couple other things that I want to quickly go over to show you. In general form, if we have general form right here, the C is our y-intercept. So you'll notice here C was 0, y-intercept is 0. So in general form, C is the y-intercept, so we can use that as a nice point. And in this one here, again, HK is the vertex. It's the value of H in the equation is opposite due to subtraction, so we're subtracting H. So that's why it's -1, and then our vertex is +1. And we'll take a look at that in just a little bit. Or sorry, in another lesson. So that is general form, vertex form, which we will use, and we'll kind of look at how we can understand those and how we can come up with equations in those. The last thing that we're going to look at here, just really quickly, is that we can also use factored form, which you used back in grade 10 polynomials. Y is equal to A, x minus q, x minus r, where q and r represent the zeros of our quadratic. And we'll look at how that is important and how that is able to represent our graph very nicely.